Well, good evening or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me today here. And it's our great pleasure. My wife Barbara and I are enjoying this cruise, and I hope you are. And did you have a good time in Namibia?
Yes.
Well, it was a very interesting place and a very remarkably barren place like my home state of New Mexico, except Namibia has the benefit of having ocean beaches nearby. But today I'm going to be talking about our ongoing ports of Port Elizabeth and East London. But I first must say, I, as a mere Yankee, am honored to be on the stage with some genuine scholars and activists from South Africa, Rob Prentice and Dean Allen and Zelda de Grange. And they are the real source of information. I've merely been a visitor for many decades, usually on a ship coming up from Antarctica originally, and then having visited all these places many times. And there's a bit of South Africa in my heart just because I've been here enough and I feel the land and I feel the people and a lot of the troubles that are here. But we're having a visit here when South Africa is probably in somewhat of a golden era because of the troubles of the past, which are so extensive, and especially if you listen to Rob Prentice about the wars and the genocides and all of that. That's like the nightmare that has mostly gone away, and we merely have modern problems, whatever those are. But there was a South African artist, Olive Schreider, who wrote, "If nature here wishes to make a mountain, she runs a range for 500 miles. As you can see, the tremendous mountains that come not just in the West Cape, but particularly up in eastern South Africa and up into the north. And then if nature has a plain, she levels 8 expanses, meaning there are many broad plains and valleys, and this is a very lush land in the south and becomes a desert, as we saw in the northwest. And if it is a rock that nature wishes, she tilts it 5,000 feet of strata on end, which are some of the mountains that border where we are in East Cape, where we're going. And over our skies are higher and more intensely blue. Our waves are larger and our rivers are fiercer. And as a corollary, I might say our people are gloriously various. And as we come to South Africa, we see the variety of people and, layered by history and immigrants and invaders and such. And now that we can come here in peace and enjoy the land is a great blessing. But we are going on our way around Cape Hope. We'll come back to Cape Town at the end of the trip, and then we're going to come up the East Cape, which is up there. We're first going to Port Elizabeth. There it is, right there. And Algoa Bay, now renamed Mandela Bay. Then we'll go up to East London, which is slightly west of East London, for you Londoners there. This is the province that was, as Dean Allen was describing, that the British colonists moved in, came by sea, came over land, and then had a 100-year war over all of these valleys and areas and set up all these towns, which he most interestingly showed us. But then further up on the north side of the East Cape is the Karoo, which is this great basin made by a tremendous asteroid that came and crashed in and made a gigantic crater and left mountainscapes like this, which are, I would say, surreal, but not unlike Table Mountain in Cape Town. The sedimentary rock layering up into a mesa, we call it in the American Southwest. This was the land of the Xhosa people. They had been Bantu origin people who came down from Central Africa over 1,000 or more years and then settled in various tribes and linguistic groups in this sort of vast, lush land. And there were people before. I mean, the anthropological history has shown that the earliest humans were not just in Africa, but they were also in South Africa in this region, and they found cave evidence and DNA analysis that show that the earliest Homo sapiens were actually from the East Cape in what is now South Africa. But these people were agricultural and cattle raising, and so they were settlers on their own, and so they came into what was then a deep forest with a lot of wildlife, and they cut the forest and grazed their cattle and became let's say, a placid and a productive land for many people. And then when the various Afrikaners and the English came in and took the land and fought with them, this was the great demise of their people, because at a certain point, in spite of their battles and their techniques and such, they were no match for guns and artillery and such. And perhaps 80% of the population of the Xhosa people were lost through warfare, disease, and particularly in one incident that Rob Prentice described, a young woman had a vision that if only the people would kill the cattle and burn their houses down, that would liberate them, and all the warriors that had been killed would resurrect and beat back the British. Well, it didn't happen, but the people remain. And this is a very critical feature in contemporary South Africa, that the Xhosa people, who are primarily in the East Cape, and this is their general region, and there are a few, particularly in the urban areas, but this is their homeland, and they have, let's say, returned to their rights and their property ownership and have somewhat prospered in the reconciliation of our times. And so the East Cape land is mostly deforested at this point and turned to agriculture with these, let's say, spread out spacious villages and fairly stable agricultural life. They're not as poor and having such a hard time as areas that are desert or more tropical. And so this is a very pleasant land, and as Dean Allen was saying, that many beautiful English-style country villages were built in this area, but this was land that was all Xhosa before, and they are here. They are still about 3 million people, and they keep their language and their culture and their traditions, even though they're mixed with the modern world and religion, let's say. But here's a village with a woman cooking the local spinach. I mean, there's a lot of food and a lot of music, dance, culture attached, and above all, rituals for the young men and young women to grow up and become leaders and assume the heritage of their people and their language. But of course, the most famous of them is this man, Nelson Mandela, who was born in the far eastern East Cape in a small village, and he came to college, and then he ended up joining the movement of the African National Congress, and we know the rest of the history because he became the great leader of South Africa. And Zelda will tell you far more detail. I just want to show that when he was finally released from prison and de Klerk and the Afrikaner and the apartheid decision was made to moderate the laws and provide more rights, he was most concerned about the poor all over South Africa, from north-south miners, other people's tribes, and how would you make a nation out of a diverse population, 11 official languages, completely different ways of livelihood, from the cities to the mines to the farms, and particularly to return respect to the native people who were here far before, who had been put into such subjugation, if not worse. And they still have a tremendous amount of poverty in different places where development is the mandate of this time, along with education, so that those who are left out will have a piece of the prosperity that has come to South Africa. This curious picture, if you can see there, I can't read it, it's actually a People's Bank ad. Says, "What a people we are," because you can see sort of the interracial, if not mixing, appreciation of each other's culture and value of working together. And so a lot of the worst has happened before. The homelands are no longer surrounded by barbed wire and police, and Nelson Mandela, out of his own personal vision, became, let's say, everyone's hero in all these different ways. So he's all over the country. You could see monuments to him, and then he could do this, could do that. He's sort of like George Washington slept here wherever you go, because he did encompass the whole country and then became the internationally famous leader. Well, where we are going, though, is on the shore here, first of all, to Port Elizabeth, which is the largest port. And then we'll be going up to East London up here. But there are a lot of different towns. Some of the excursions will go up to places, perhaps go to Grahamstown, or here, I know we're going to the Adu Safari Camp and Elephant Park. And out of East London, we'll have similar trips inland, but I'll show you just mostly the towns. So this is the most, let's say, coastal resort part of all of South Africa, other than the West Cape and Cape Town area. But these towns were developed mainly because of the British Overseas Company, and this is one of the ships that would come into Port Elizabeth or East London to bring settlers and supplies. But notice the flag, which has not the stars but the stripes. And so the company first, and then the Crown Colony and the governors that were sent out here built these kind of forts. This is at Port Elizabeth on the Fish River, which, as Dean Allen described and Rob described, was the dividing line between the settlers and the Xhosa, and then the further peoples that had yet to be conquered or joined in the, let's say, the difficult union of the time. This is a monument in Port Elizabeth, which if you can read it there, it says, the greatness of a nation consists not as much in the number of its people or the extent of its territory, but in the extent and justice of its compassion, which are lovely words that perhaps were not as appreciated by those who were subjugated. But anyway, that was the establishment of the modern state, and with the infrastructure, the education, the religion, all that has become part of this region. So we'll be going to Port Elizabeth, which, like many other places in South Africa, has been given a local name, in this case a Xhosa name. I cannot pronounce it properly, Get Baha. But English is the standard language, and you won't hear much Xhosa in the city areas, but out in the country, yes. But it's a very stately and beautiful laid out small city of about 200,000 people, and it overlooks the ocean with these beautiful colonial buildings. There's Queen Victoria herself, and the Mayor's Hall, or the City Hall. This is actually the harbor master's offices, which dates from the time when customs duties and shipping was the source of all the wealth for the area. Of course, they would export things too. But in spite of a lot of neglect and maybe tear down, there's some unusual colonial era buildings that have Italianate porticos and other symbols of European presence in this area. This is a very curious sort of Celtic kind of a cross, which is dedicated, quite surprisingly, to Prester John, in memory of all the seafarers who searched for Prester John. And Rob Prentice described how this was the mythical Christian kingdom somewhere in Africa, where Portuguese and other European sailors would come thinking they would finally find it and be welcome and received, and it would be part of greater Christendom. Well, they never found it, but they did establish their own societies, and this is the town hall and another era building, which are in beautiful condition and show the prosperity and pride of this area. And a lot of the downtown, we'll go through it briefly, maybe a little city tour. A lot of it is sort of in the state of either demolition or reconstruction, or else it's been turned into local markets and things that are not quite the high street that it was maybe once upon a time. Over the town, there are a couple of big towers. This is the Campanile, which is in a park, and you can, if you're really strong, you go up and get a view of the whole area. I tried, but then it started leaning. Was that me, or is that Pisa? I can't remember. But anyway, then there's another high mountain overlooking the ocean called the Donkin Reserve, with a memorial and lighthouse. And then there's new development. This is the new football stadium. So it's a vibrant community and cooperative, and I think that's primarily because they share the ocean front, which is the great attraction for many people who come in from inland and from Joburg and come down to the beach in this area of the East Cape. And it's a very rough and rocky coast in many places, but then you can have a tidal pool for a local swim. But of course, some people like a little more activity, and so it's become a windsurfing and sailing in a big beach resort area for many people. And now they've renamed the bay Mandela Bay, and it's open to all, and they built these sort of seaside resort casinos and such. So it's an example of how those who are prosperous in South Africa come and have a holiday here. And so this is something we can do if we wish, but a lot of it is sort of neo-colonial architecture that sort of may have been there before, but now it's brand new, and it's sort of the resortification of yet another part of the world, but that's okay. That means people are actually getting along and having a good time and, like ourselves, enjoying the world. And so a scene like this in previous generations would not be possible. A mixed race beach, everybody getting along, at least on their vacation. And so if it's nice and warm and sunny, we too can go for a dip out here. Though it's mainly an industrial port, and we'll be over again like we just were in Wallis Bay in an industrial area, and we have to get out through security. Offshore, there are a number of different islands, like there were in Namibia, with penguins. So these are the local brood, and there's some over in Cape Town and across the coast here. So people think it's these little birds only live in Antarctica. Well, they come up here for a vacation. Now inland, you have the growing ranges of the mountains going up toward the north, but most of it has been agriculturalized, so it's kind of a lush land. We'll have this as we go further east to Durban and Richards Bay also, with the Thousand Hills and this rather verdant landscape, part of which has been agriculturalized, but undoubtedly you'll all go on one of the safari trips to one of the camps, and this one I was at a couple of years ago, the Pumba camp, and with the rainbow flag of South Africa. And you may go to this one, but many of them are similar, and this is not so far from the shore in our ship here, but you go up into a lodge where they have accommodations and meals and such, but of course what you want to do is go out and see the animals. So these are my pictures when I was there with my son a few years ago, and you can get your own, but they're all remarkably similar unless you get to know the elephant individually. And the giraffes. So this is one of these vast areas which has some containment to keep poachers out and keep the animals in, but they have plenty of room. So I'll go on to my first scientific commentary about why do giraffes have such long legs? Because their feet smell. And why do giraffes take so long to apologize? Because it's so far to swallow their pride. All right, yeah. If you heard this in elementary school, forgive me. And how do giraffes begin making love? By necking. Well, anyway, there are a lot of other animals, the springboks, many antelope, and different kinds of course, that's the name of the famous rugby team. Then there are other ones, there's dozens of varieties. This one is Sitatunga, and they're just differences in their horns and their coloring, and they remain to themselves. And then, of course, the zebra. So forgive me again, what do you call a group of zebras? It's actually a dazzle of zebras, of all things. And then there's the thought, what's red and white and black and white and red all over? The zebra with a sunburn. You must have heard all these before. And so the zebra, the new foal, it's called, the mare, is getting his stripes in order. And by the way, they are naturally black-skinned, but when they are in uterus, something triggers a melatonin so that it makes part of their skin and then their fur above it white. So this is called a symbol of racial cooperation in a way. But this young zebra, as it gets his fur, says, "Mommy, am I black with white stripes or white with black stripes?" And the mother says, "Well, you have to go ask the zebra god." And the zebra god said, "Yes, you are." But actually, every zebra has its own unique stripe, so that's they all may look the same to us, but then we all look the same to them. Then you have warthogs, which are probably the most dangerous animal out there because they will attack you just for fun. But on this particular camp, they have white rhinos, And of course, when you go out in the midday, they usually already had their buffet for breakfast, and they're all resting and taking it easy. So it's easier to get close to them. They're not, unless it's a mating season or you wake them up in the morning. But of course, and then there are quite a few elephants, and these gather as a pride of elephants, and but they're completely tame because there's no hunting, and so you can go up fairly close, if not too close. And so here's another question. The bull elephant's stomping around, and he's about to step on a mouse. And the mouse calls out, "Stop, stop." And the elephant looks down and says, why should I stop stepping on you? And the mouse looks up and says, "I'm pregnant, and it's yours." Well, these are all true stories. Anyway, the Cape buffalo, which is, again, a kind of, don't get in its way. And then there were lions taking their afternoon siesta. And again, I'm not a particular wildlife photographer, but in these places you can go so close you can get a fairly good look at them, and vice versa. Fortunately, he had eaten the last photographer that came by. And then of course, the males protect their pride, and the females and the cubs, but the females do the hunting and are the real, let's say, power of the pride. But I took this picture, and I've never seen a lion's eyes look like that. And I don't know what she was thinking, but I decided to leave her alone. Anyway, we're then going on to East London, which is a smaller town on the Buffalo River, and there are these marshes and wetlands around this, where from here to the northeast, this is the Wild Coast, where there are very few settlements, and a rough coast, and very dramatic headlands and such. So this is one of the rivers that comes in near East London. The town itself is on the Buffalo River with major shipping and such, and we'll be docked right there. But you can walk right into town, so it's pretty convenient and small city in that sense. But the coast itself is very dramatic, headlands and rocks and beaches and such. So you have a view of the ocean throughout the town, and they built the main city sort of on the overlook for the ocean. So again, it's a small but a very charming city, with its, like Dean Allen was saying, some of the lack of maintenance for the older buildings, other than the main city offices and some of the monuments. But a lot of it has been either renovated or rebuilt in modern style. But one of the attractions here has been stated is the museum, which is not a large museum, but it has particularly the local unique things that have been found here. And so as a natural history museum, its star exhibit is the famous Keolasanth fish, the 100-million-year-old living fossil that was caught in the 1930s and brought to this young woman, Marjorie Latimer, who was an amateur scientist, and she realized this was important and documented and sent word around, and you heard the tale from Rob. So this was the biggest news of the time, 1939, and I remember his saying is that she got so much attention for having identified this fish that in her later years she called that damn fish that ruined my life, because everybody wanted to know about it. Well, it's just a fish, but as you heard, it was a fossil record until the living one was found. And it's interesting because it has early evolution, so that from this species or its cousins came all of the amphibians and reptiles, and it was a sort of a precursor to much of life today. But the one that she had, and then they've found more in the Indian Ocean and other places, it has these spots and speckles, which means it's phosphorescent. It lives so deep in the ocean that it has its own lighting system, either for prey catching things or getting away from things. But above all, it has these lobby fins that were the precursors to legs, and thereby the fish that came back ashore and turned into frogs and maybe even us. But that's what it probably looks like underwater with its glowing spots. And here's the one that's in the museum, almost as fresh as the day it was caught. But as I say, they keep finding more. And so this is one of those developments in natural history that is surprising, because something that was lost has been found. So they don't have to replicate it like they're going to do with the mastodon or something. But you can imagine if you're a littler fish, that's not a good sight. And of course, this at the time led to, let's say, some press speculation. There must be more monsters out there. And so supposedly, this discovery led to this movie. Now, if you haven't seen it, you can see the current version, which is Aquaman. But anyway, this is the great discoveries of the era right here in East London. And now the fish has been made fun of. They've added a few mechanical parts, and I think it gets Wi-Fi now, and it has an Instagram account, you know, like most modern fish do. But the museum has quite a display of natural history, some local ethnic history. Here's a giant manta ray model. And they even have an ostrich. Well, a bird formerly known as an ostrich, because it's not a living one, but you can go out into the countryside and see actual ostriches, which are raised for their meat and their feathers. And so leads me to another story out here in South Africa there are two female ostriches who are walking along in this veldt in the big broadlands, and they see up on the ridge a couple of male ostriches sort of eyeing them. And they say, well, let's go this way. And they look behind them and they say the two males are coming down the hill. And they say, well, we better run. They start running. And they look behind and they say, the males are running after us and they're going to catch up. We better get away. And they keep running and they realize they're not going to escape. And say, well, they said, well, we really should just hide. And so the two females stop and put their heads in the ground. So, something they don't actually do. And then the two males come running along, stop right alongside them and say, where'd they go? Where'd they go? Well, I caught one myself, and we get along. But anyway, I want to go back to the Xhosa people, who are the largest group of people in this part of South Africa. And they have gone through a great transformation. You can hear more from our good historians aboard. But they're now living in many in an urban situation, suburban. They have the education and the technology and all this, which has transformed their traditional culture. But the one thing they have maintained is their language. Now, maybe Rob can pronounce this properly, but that's a sign on a bus in Xhosa. So a lot of them have been transcribed into those Roman letter things, even though it's very inaccurate. Remember the clicking sounds of the people in Namibia. How do you spell? Well, I misspelled it right there. And so even the wildlife is, let's say, impacted by the modern world. And you have conflicts with the wildlife and not just the farmers, but even the urban, suburban areas. And Dean Allen's going to talk about the rewilding of the East Cape, which will be very interesting because that's a movement around the world to restore whatever, let's say, wilderness areas and wildlife while we can, where we can. But meanwhile, a lot of people are, let's say, in the modern world and like those zebras under a highway and wondering where quite to go. But I took this picture in East London a couple of years ago, and it's meant to, the poster is meant to, create a little central pride in most of the people. It's not my culture to be poor. So the aspirations of all the people of South Africa are the same, to have a secure, comfortable life and education and whatever they want in life without the troubles of the past. Of course, it's a commercial capitalist world, so here's the other curious poster of money isn't everything, but it makes me want it. Well, I don't know how that must feel. And then kind of the spirit of the Xhosa people now gets, now that the wars are over, they get expressed in different ways. Now here's a modern warrior, now I don't know if Dean is here, who's a cricket player. And then there's the international culture that comes in and kind of swaps the media, and like we all know, we have a hard time staying away from Barney sometimes, but this is all in Afrikaans. And then there's the TV, radio, and music industry such. Oh, by the way, if you have the ability to stream a radio station, there's one called Planet Radio, and it's a Google Earth map, and then they point out local stations all around the world, so you can tune into wherever we are to their local radio and hear the music and the talk and the language, which is quite unusual ability, called Planet Radio. Or you can go to the last remaining music shops and buy some of the tremendous production of African music. South Africa, Nigeria, Senegal, Kenya, they are all almost in an era of great musical production and concertizing, so, unless they happen to be at war or unable to do it. But this is an example. Just South Africa has a very vibrant music scene. And you may have seen in Dean's talk earlier this morning, this fellow, the famous favorite son, Trevor Noah, became the comedian who kind of represented the wit and wisdom of his own people in South Africa and became a star in international circumstances. But I'm going to leave you with the saying that you heard from Zelda, Ubuntu, which is a general term for cooperation and appreciation of the needs of others. And the various translations of it in various Bantu-based languages come out, I am because we are. And I once had the pleasure of meeting Bishop Tutu when he came to our church to preach. And he said this folds in completely with Christianity and Islam and other religions that preach compassion and cooperation. And so this is sort of a binding moral code of much of Africa, especially in South Africa. And the modern era would not have happened without this great man, Nelson Mandela. And this is actually in Natal, one of the many monuments to him, by an artist who was able to design a cut metal that then as you walk around the sculpture, it changes perspective. And so it almost seems like he's there alive looking at you as you go around this memorial. A very unusual artwork. And I leave you with one of his sayings, when a man has done what he considers to be his duty to his people and his country, he can rest in peace. And so on this shore of East Cape in South Africa, you know, we return to the sea. I mean, we are on a ship and we are seeing the world from the perspective of a visitor landing. How many people have done this before? Maybe not in quite such comfort, but I will say that, here's a proverb here. The heart is but the beach beside the sea, that is the world. And the sea drives truth into a man like salt. Now these are these cliffs that are outside of Port Elizabeth where they're big sand dunes where they've met the sea, so they're quite difficult to get down. But then, as Isaac Denison, the great African writer, said, the cure for anything in life is salt water, sweat, tears, or the sea. And so as we go back down to join the sea, it can be a bit rough in these waters. And I'll give another talk just about the Southern Ocean and the qualities of the ocean as we go around on our way around South Africa. But it can be a little dangerous at sometimes. But this picture reminded me of Rob's comment. You can't scare me, I'm South African. Thank you. And with that, I wish you a great trip here and look forward to meeting you. Thank you very much and bon voyage.